Hello and welcome to Unpublished TV. I'm Ed Hand. UTV is the newest production from Unpublished Media. This weekly live panel discussion completes our set of 4 internet properties created to help you influence and impact public policy decision-making in Canada. They are Unpublished.vote.com, the Unpublished Cafe podcast, which I also host, and Unpublished.vote. It's a voting tool, an issue-based information and voting tool for you to use. Now, each week we introduce a new topic through the Unpublished Cafe podcast and Unpublished.vote, where you'll find the podcast and the background information from various sources to help you find out more about the issue and inform before you cast your vote and email your MP to tell them why you think what you do. Then every Monday night at 8 Eastern, right here, we'll reconvene here on UTV. And we're going to examine how the issues evolved over the last week or so. Our audience has reacted to the poll question, and we'll want your input as well. You can send us questions on this show right now on Facebook Live or on YouTube. Now, answers are few and far between for school boards getting ready to welcome students back in September. The Ontario government has said it would announce more details coming up this week. But at this point, we still don't have anything. We have 72 boards in Ontario that they have to have their plan in place for August 4th. These school boards are preparing those plans for 3 possible scenarios: a full-time return to the classroom, virtual classes for all, or a hybrid model that combines the two. This will not be any routine return in September, as social distancing, hand washing, sanitizer, they're all going to be part of the new normal when it goes back to school. Now, working in their favor is the fact that children have been less infected by the COVID-19 pandemic compared to other age groups, and that may actually be in their favor. Many pediatric experts feel it's crucial for young people to get back to school, but doing it safely. And I ask you, how about you? Do you feel comfortable sending your kids back to school in September? That was our Unpublished.vote question. And 65% of our viewers said no, they don't feel comfortable about that at all. 27% said they feel fine. About 8% were unsure. So joining us tonight to talk about going back to school, Joel Westheimer is the University Research Chair in Democracy and Education at the University of Ottawa. Moritz Stiles is the NDP MPP for Davenport and the opposition education critic. Liz Stewart, the Vice President of the Canadian Teachers Federation. And Laura Gonzalez is the second Executive Vice President at the Ontario Federation of Home and School Associations. So we've got everybody covered today and tonight to talk about sending the kids back to school. But let's start with you, Laura. First off, 65% of the people who watched or listened to the podcast and made their own judgment feel they don't feel comfortable sending their kids back to school in September. You hearing that a lot with the association?
And represents parents across the province. And what we have noticed is that the response may be quite different from one area to another. So in areas where I guess the situation is more contained, parents actually may feel a little bit better sending their kids to school. So we have heard actually from our members, there is a difference between Thames Valley, for example, compared to Windsor. So it does depend on where the parents are located. But we also are hearing from parents that they are concerned about the lack of socialization. So they are torn. Of course, they want their kids to be safe. They want the teachers to be safe. They want everybody to be safe. But they also need the kids back to seeing their friends and being able to socialize, although there are still many questions about what that would look like, especially when you may have younger kids with limited self-control in terms of keeping distancing, which might be very different from high school students. And finally, the other thing that it's also make them feel a bit like wanting to send the kids to school is the labor situation. So we do hear from parents that not every parent is able to stay at home and support learning from home or support hybrid models. And there are differences between what each parent can provide. And oftentimes, the parents who need the most, the schools would be the ones that are least able to support their kids learning at home.
Joel, are you surprised
All,
two-thirds?
all these things.
Okay, thank you, Laura. But Joel, are you surprised two-thirds are uncomfortable, totally uncomfortable about this?
No, I'm not, Ed. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. Right? We don't know exactly what it's going to look like in the fall, and the boards don't know where the COVID situation is going to be. And look, from a purely public health perspective, if we were going to narrow in only on COVID-19, obviously the thing to do is for everyone to stay in their room and close the door. But this has been going on for a long time, and we have to balance various risks. And the inequality that is going to be very present no matter what approach we take is one of the biggest problems right now, and boards are wrestling with that. My big concern is that when I've heard all the options about going back to school, what I haven't heard a lot of is how there are going to be different expectations of teachers and students curriculum wise. See, I'm not overly concerned. I know everyone's talking about kids falling behind or catching up, but falling behind who, right? The entire world is on pause right now. And there's not a lot of research that shows that a kid missing a week or a month of school or even a year is going to have adverse effects on their, long-term life prospects. And that kind of research is just when it's one kid, but this is the whole world is on pause. But what teachers are going to be facing is something that concerns me a lot because they could possibly be teaching two curriculum. Teaching is an impossibly difficult job as it is, and they might be teaching both in person and online. And if there aren't the resources and the room to allow teachers to do that well, that's going to be a big problem come the fall. So what we really need is thinking about the classroom learning from the perspective of teachers and students and not just about what works bureaucratically from the top.
Maureen, what do you think?
Well, I'm not really surprised at all to hear that many people have those kinds of concerns. I've been certainly sensing over the last few months rising anxiety from Ontario families, and I'd say all across the province. Either way, I completely agree with Laura that it can depend from board to board. But what I'm hearing a lot of is that people are really confused. They feel like the government here in Ontario isn't placing the priority on return to school that they should be. I'm hearing increasingly from a lot of families where one of the parents is, and it tends to be women, are debating whether or not they need to leave the workforce. And we've already seen a dip in the number of women's participation in the workforce now down to 1980s levels. So if we see that happening, that's going to have a massive impact on our economy. So we don't want that, right? We want people to be able to be supported. And so that's one thing we've been calling for. But at the same time, there is absolutely deep concern about safety and health of our children, but also for the education workers, the adults who are working in our schools. And I hear that from many, many people across the province. And they're wondering why the government has yet to really seem to be putting the focus and the clarity of communication around this issue.
And of course, Liz, you and your members are there at the front of the classroom. And how are they feeling right now?
Well, I mean, CTF conducted a national teacher survey in June, and we had overwhelming participation from all across Canada. So this isn't just an Ontario issue. This is a pan-Canadian issue. And, and that came back quite clearly, over 83% of the respondents are concerned around, what return to school is going to be like and what they're going to be faced with when they walk back into classrooms. And certainly, on a provincial level, I've certainly heard it as well from teachers because, it is around what that teaching and learning environment is going to be like, and what resources are going to be available for them to be able to make sure that students are receiving the very best that they can, because we know that's what teachers always want to do. But understanding as well, as Joel said, we've also got students who will choose not to be in the school. and who will continue with distance learning, and how is that program going to run, and who is going to be teaching that program? Because I mean, I'm an elementary classroom teacher and I might be good, but I can't be in two places at once, and I can't do two things at the same time. I can either deal with the students in front of me every day, or I can be doing distance learning with those students who choose not to come into the school. So, those are big questions that teachers have. How do I maintain that level? How do I make sure that I'm teaching curriculum to students and we're moving things forward, and keep them safe at the same time, right? Because that is a number one priority for us. And also, I say, for many teachers, for those of us in education, we understand that school is about more than just students learning. A big part of what we do every day in schools is we prepare students to learn. We prepare that ground for them, and we give them the opportunities so that they can learn moving forward. That's going to take a huge portion of our time when we get back to school, because we have students coming back into classrooms. We have adults coming back into classrooms with huge levels of anxieties. And we need to make sure that we're addressing those issues and addressing those mental health issues before we can even begin to think about curriculum.
Now, more interesting thing, obviously there's going to be distancing, there's spacing, all that kind of thing. There's maybe 15 students to a classroom, right? Well, classes now, you're going to need a lot more room. You're going to need a lot more teachers. You're going to need a lot more everything, are you not?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I actually just last week, feels like about a month ago, but last week I introduced a motion in the legislature asking the government to properly consult and to meaningfully invest in education. Because one of the things that's going to happen is, if we do want to try to return, hopefully this hybrid model doesn't seem to be something that most people think can work. But what we really need to get to is more smaller classes. And this coming from a government that I don't probably have to remind anybody, actually grew class sizes over the last 2 years. So we need more smaller classes, which means we're going to need more space. And we're also going to need more teachers and other educational workers. And that requires funding. And also, by the way, something else that they haven't really done well, which we've been pushing for, is a lot of what Liz is talking about, is actually listening to the people on the front line in their experience and knowledge and expertise, and what they can tell us about how to best make this kind of situation work for everyone. And they really haven't done that kind of consultation either. So, but yeah, I mean, you are looking at this point, the recommendation generally seems to be smaller classes. But again, most of the boards have yet to actually come through with their plans. And now we're hearing that the minister is going to make some kind of big announcement this week before we even really know what the boards think they can accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Joel, the kids have been out of school since March. Do they return in September with a bit of trepidation, or are they just anxious to get back, back into a routine, back with their buddies, that kind of a thing?
I think most kids are going to be quite resilient in this, and the learning curve is going to be quick. But there are kids who are going to need some extra special help, and I completely agree with Marit and Liz. I mean, I'd say the three most important things that we could think about going back to school are smaller class size, and smaller class size. Like it's a no-brainer, right? I mean, we've known small class sizes are effective from all kinds of teaching and learning perspectives for decades already. That's why the wealthiest people in North America send their kids to schools that have class sizes of 12 and 13 and 14. Now, this is an opportunity, right? This is a real opportunity to do what before everyone was saying was impossible. But, that's true with so many things in this pandemic. I mean, the US people called for healthcare for everyone, and they said, oh my God, we could never find $1 trillion. That's impossible. Now they're spending $3 trillion, right? Whatever was impossible before is now possible. And this is a time to focus in on things like smaller class size that allow teachers to build the one-on-one relationships with their students that we know are so effective for education. And in this case, it happens to have the side effect of being more in line with what our health experts are saying will work this September.
Laura, what does the association think about smaller class sizes? Is that something the parents are more in favor of?
Oh, absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. And one of the other things that Liz brought up was parents are wondering about mental health supports. And parents understand that teachers are teachers, and they wonder what extra support, if any, teachers will have to deal with these issues because it's not just going to be about the curriculum. So parents are wondering about that too. And we have also heard the same thing that she mentioned about a teacher can be a teacher full time in the
Mm.
classroom or for online learning, but how can we expect them to manage both at the same time? So parents are also looking for a lot of more clarity. And in terms if any decisions are being made in August and any plans are approved, what about policies? Like what about if a kid coughs? When do they get sent home? Are the siblings sent home? Is the entire family expected to self quarantine? So those are the more procedural questions, I guess, that parents are also having in the midst of all this.
All right. Now, I've got a question coming in from a viewer on Facebook. Do the panelists know what solution the majority of parents support? A return to school or distance learning? Which do you
I
think?
can, well, I can speak for the our largest board actually.
Mm.
About from our associations in the place where we're located, our largest board did support 2/3 in favor of in-presence learning. But we also have parents that realize that for some students, remote learning actually has worked better during this time. So having the option to have that choice uh, would be something that parents would like, but in a situation of when it is what is best for the student.
All right. Now, Joel, what do you think? Do you know what, like, we know what you would support, but do you have any idea what the majority of parents would support?
Well, I think that Liz and Marie have access to some of the same data that I've seen, but anecdotally, I've also I know that there are different issues that different parents are facing. Parents with children with disabilities and learning disabilities and other disabilities have been hit especially hard with this, and they're tearing their hair out because they need the supports that schools can offer. There are some kids who rely on schools for food, and
Mm.
so for a lot of parents, there's a lot of reason for kids to be back in school. But of course, parents also have concerns about health and about whether teachers are going to be able to facilitate learning in this kind of environment.
Liz, Joel brings up a good point. The school is not just about learning. It's some there's the breakfast clubs, the homework clubs, all that kind of stuff. And, I can see how it's so crucial to get them back into that, but then they're going to be there even longer. Does that not even create even more of a problem? You know what I mean? They're going early for breakfast. They're in class all day. Then they're sticking around for a homework club, and then they'll go home at the end of the day.
Well, I think we're going to have to take a look at how schools are structured.
Hmm.
We talk about returning to school, but regardless of what model is selected and what happens, I think everybody sort of has to readjust to a new normal, right? As September rolls around, and quite frankly, for probably for quite some time after that. So certainly from a teacher's perspective, I mean, our role is to keep the students we engage with every day as safe as we possibly can. And that will probably mean that, we're looking at cohorts, we're looking at smaller groups of students, hopefully, where we've got smaller groups of students that we can cohort. And that will probably mean that clubs, after school, extracurricular, those things will not.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot see how they could still occur in the same format. So I don't think that's going to be an immediate issue, although, Joel raises, great points in that many of our students rely on schools for so many more services than just what happens during the classroom, right? They rely
Yeah.
on schools for those safety nets, if you like, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's they really are the hub of a community many times, and and teachers are are highly aware of that, which is why, in our pan-Canadian survey, 89% of our of teachers across the country raised concerns because they were concerned about the health and well-being of the students they serve, because they were not able to be at school, because they understand that oftentimes for many students, school is a safe place for them,
Oh, yeah.
and it is a safe place they may not have access to otherwise. And so, that is first and foremost in much of the thinking of our membership as they look at the students they serve and are really concerned around how do we get them back into the buildings so that we can keep them safe, but do it in a way where we're all going to be safe.
Yeah, that's what we're going to need now. Maura, I look at this situation, and we're waiting for August 4th. The school boards are waiting to find out which way we're going here. Apparently, we're going to hear this week. I find it a little interesting that you moved most of the province to stage 3, but you still haven't figured out what you're going to do to send kids back to school in a month, and you've got parents that are just pulling their hair out trying to figure out what's going on.
It's so upside down. I really think the government's whole approach, to economic recovery and the reopening has been really backwards. And I'm not saying that we don't want to see restaurants open or anything. But when you talk to business owners as well, the bosses are saying we need a solution to this too, because what happens when September hits and our employees are still at home, potentially juggling everything. And, as Liz mentioned, a lot of what we think of as school is also all these other supports that exist around schools and as a community hub. And so in some cases, some parents will have access to programs outside of school that they might be able to send their kids to for additional support or childcare or make arrangements. But for a lot of families, that won't happen. And we know that, childcare is a really important part of the conversation too, because even though the government keeps claiming that 90% of childcare spaces in this province are open, that's just simply not true based on everything that we're hearing from childcare centers. It's more like 40 if you're lucky, and that's not even really 40 at full capacity. So I think we have a really upside down approach to things, and I do actually think it's also a gendered approach, right? It's failing to really take into account the fact that women have been, in particular, but families have been carrying a lot of extra burden throughout this. And at some point, when businesses are up and running and everything is reopening, they're going to be expected to be back at work, and there won't be the same. And hopefully, we can maintain some of the same supports. That's the other issue. Will we continue to have paid?
Joel, when we just sort of following up on what Maura's saying, the situation I see with going back to school, getting these kids ready for that. In the back there, the parents are, they're the ones, your kids are always, looking to you for leadership, right? But if you're the one who's kind of on the fence about something, are they going to feel that as well?
Yeah, they're going to feel the uncertainty as well. The pandemic is like an X-ray, right? It reveals the faults in our society, and I think Merritt is right to point out the gendered relations of what's going on, and it reveals the inequalities and the problems that we have as a society. But it also reveals some really good things. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there were tweets like, I'm sure all of you guys remember this. There were tweets like, "Day 2 of homeschooling, we should double our teachers' salaries," right? Yeah. People started to really understand the difficult and important work that teachers do in a way that they may not have before. And that's, I think, what we really need to focus on. We need to focus on returning to class in a way that offers the resources and the conditions that teachers need to do their work. I haven't heard anything from the government about scaling back. For example, let's cancel EQAO right away. Just to start with, teachers need the room to focus on rebuilding the relationships and the community that's been lost through so many months of social isolation, right? So let's scale back the focus on academic achievement, and let's let our teachers work on building a classroom community in these small groups or cohorts or online or in person, however it's going to play out. The most important thing is connections to people, right? This online learning might work for a handful of students. For most people, it's like, it's like frozen pizza, right? The versus the real thing. I mean, it's the same ingredients, but it doesn't taste as good. It just doesn't work as well. And we need the human connections that go along with teaching. That's the most important thing.
Laura, the school boards have to have their plan in for August 4th. And the province obviously this week is going to let us know which way it's going to go. What I'm wondering, at least from the association's perspective, is a month going to be enough time to get it all set to go? It'd be less than a month because some of them are going back at the end of August.
No, our parents are worried that it's not enough time. And one of the things is also in regards to childcare. So, for instance, there were parents with kids perhaps in, grade 2 or 3 who had not used daycares anymore, that depending on what model is chosen, they may need now daycare that is not currently available, and they won't have enough time to get that. So a month seems too short to make this type of decisions and to make plans, whether it's splitting the household work or going back to the workforce. So no, our parents are worried for sure.
Yeah. Mort, the one thing I wonder about, and we talked about this in the podcast, is rural internet is abysmal in this province. And if you're going to go to online teaching, online anything, there's going to be people left behind here. And not to mention when, if the cost of internet plus the cost of the computer and all that kind of stuff, some people who are limited funds are not going to be able to participate.
Yeah, and it isn't just even rural areas. I live in my riding is in downtown Toronto, and there are people in my community that don't. Obviously, they could have access, but they don't have access because they can't afford it, or they don't have many areas good access. And then consider as well that many families are bearing an additional cost. To included teachers, by the way, which is an issue I don't think that's been talked about very much. But everybody has been bearing that additional cost, to upgrade or whatever, even if they already have Wi-Fi. But so it's definitely an equity issue there, and I think boards did a pretty amazing job in most parts of the province of getting that technology into people's hands, but they can't address that bigger issue. And I think it's also important, it really is important to acknowledge too, that what we just went through wasn't really, online learning in the way that, we've had it before. This was remote emergency distance learning. And many of the people who were delivering it, some may have been doing it for the first time. Some had their own responsibilities at home and were juggling all of that. So, I expect that the government's going to try to talk a bit more about, continue to try to expand the role of online learning, and maybe even bring in some more privatization around the delivery of online learning. But they've got a big issue to deal with in terms of access, technology, and broadband.
Yeah. Joel, a quick question for you. I'm wondering, we go back to school in September. What's it going to look like?
Well, good question, right? I mean, that's what we're here talking about, and we really don't know. And we're waiting for these announcements. But what I'd like to see is creative thinking around it. We clearly know that we need teachers and students to be in smaller groups. That's going to take resources, and the resources should be freed up for that to happen. We know that there's going to be a lot of repair and rebuilding necessary, and that's going to mean that not everything can be done all at once, which is why I'm suggesting scaling back things like EQAO to take some of the pressure off students and teachers and let them focus on the things that matter right now and what's important to both parents and students and teachers. So we don't know what it's going to look like, but I think that we can focus on the idea that the relationships are primary and that we need to help teachers create the best conditions that they can for students, and that's going to take resources.
Do you think going back to school in September is going to be the catalyst for a second wave?
I think that our health authorities, actually, from what I understand, have not done a good enough job, and our politicians, of explaining what is likely to happen, which is what some people are calling the dance. We're going to ease up restrictions, and people are going to start getting back to a normal life. And then we're going to see rises in the cases. And then we're going to have to scale back a little. And so we have to be prepared for that kind of give and take of releasing out, waiting for the cases to go up, because they will go up. Right now, only 1% of Canadians test positive for COVID or the antibodies, which means only 1% of the population has had it. Until we get the vaccine, there's going to be ups and downs. And so we have to be prepared for opening up and scaling back. But one thing that was said at the beginning, I think Marit said, it's true that we have to focus on the priorities. Getting kids back to school is a priority. So, we don't want to see bars opening before we get the virus under enough control so that we can send our kids to school. So let's prioritize things, but it's going to be a back and forth.
Yeah, that will. And apparently we will hear from the Ontario government this week, its plans for the school boards coming up this September. I want to thank you all for joining us here on Unpublished TV. Laura Gonzalez is second executive vice president of the Ontario Federation of Home and School Associations. Liz Stewart is the vice president of the Canadian Teachers Federation. Moritz Stiles is the NDP MPP for Davenport and the opposition education critic. And Joel Westheimer, University Research Chair in Democracy and Education at the University of Ottawa. Well, UTV will be taking a break for next Monday, August 3rd. We will return on August 10th, and we'll have another episode of Unpublished TV. Thanks for watching.